You know, as a tech YouTuber, I find myself telling you guys to back up your servers all the time. And other YouTubers that are in the same space as me, they basically say the same thing. And there's a good reason for that. It's extremely important. And I'll never understand why so many people out there just, they don't do a good job of backing up their servers. But I know that's not you, because I know you are great at backing up your servers, but I'm going to make it even better, because what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to teach you guys about backups and snapshots in Proxmox. So let's take a look. Alright, so let's take a look at backups and snapshots. As we've gone through the series so far, I've created a few containers, and I've also created a few virtual machines. Now, to be honest, I don't have all that much going on right now. These particular containers and VMs, all they really include is Apache, and the default Apache configuration is what they have, so all they have is the default start page. But what we're going to do instead is pretend that these are extremely important, and we definitely want to back these up. Now, Proxmox supports both snapshots and backups. We're going to look at both in this video. So what I'm going to do is start with virtual machines, and I'm going to click on this one right here. And you'll notice that we have a backup section here as well as a snapshot section. So what's the difference between a backup and a snapshot? So let me try to explain the difference. So the thing is, a backup is completely separate from the virtual machine. I mean, it's not separate in terms of it being a backup of the virtual machine. It includes everything on the disk because it is actually a full clone of the disk. But you can move this backup to another storage media. And if you have shared storage, for example, if you have a TrueNAS system on your network, you can actually mount that storage, which we'll be covering later in the series, and send your backups over to that. In addition to that, there's a dedicated Proxmox backup server. That's something that I'm going to be going over in a dedicated video, but I just bring it up because I want you guys to know that it does exist. Now, a snapshot, on the other hand, is actually a part of the virtual machine itself. You can't actually take the snapshot and move it to another system. In fact, snapshots are actually a part of the virtual machine disk, not a clone of the virtual machine disk like a backup is. So you might be wondering when you should use the backup feature and when you should consider using a snapshot. Now, part of that is down to personal preference. In my opinion, a snapshot makes a lot of sense when you want to test a piece of software and you're not really sure how that software is going to behave, or maybe you want to evaluate the software and find out if it's a good fit for the purpose that you are installing it for. In that case, it makes sense to create a snapshot, and then you could test that piece of software. And then if you decide that you don't like it or something like that, you could just revert the snapshot, and it'll be just like you've never installed that particular application. Now, of course, you can just uninstall the application. You don't need a snapshot for that. But sometimes when you install an application and then remove it, there's bits and pieces, basically junk files all over the disk. And even when you uninstall the application, it's possible that some of those files might remain. So snapshots are a really good idea when you're testing something. So let's see a quick example of that. I'm going to take a snapshot of this virtual machine right here. I'll click Take Snapshot. And let's just say I want to remove Apache. I'm going to give this snapshot a name that's going to help me understand exactly what its purpose is. So I'll just name it Before Removing Apache. Simple enough. Now, one thing that I want to call your attention to is this box right here for Include RAM. This is pretty cool. So you could think of this as snapshots on steroids. I mean, normally a snapshot is just a snapshot of the disk. But actually, if you choose to include RAM, then that means you're going to get a snapshot that'll include this state in memory as well, which could actually be really cool. It could be very useful. You could have a snapshot that not only includes the disk, but the current state of the disk, as well as RAM. Now, I'm going to uncheck this because I don't really need that for this demonstration. I'll just click Take Snapshot, and let's see the process. And as you can see, it's fast. That was really quick. And snapshots generally are very quick. That's one of the benefits. And we have the snapshot right here. It tells us when the snapshot was created, and I didn't change anything on the virtual machine, but I did create a snapshot. So what I can do now is actually change something on the VM and then see how to revert that change. But first of all, I do need to know the IP address so I can go ahead and connect to it. I prefer to use SSH when I can. And there we have the IP address. So what I'll do is switch over to a terminal. And now I'm connected to the virtual machine. So what I'm going to do is remove Apache. To be on the safe side, I'll add the purge option, and I'm going to remove the Apache 2 package. Before I do that though, I'll just open up a new tab here, and I'll prove that Apache is currently working. And there's the default start page. So far so good. So back here in the terminal, what I'm going to do is complete this command right here. And now Apache is uninstalled. If you don't believe me, what I'll do is refresh this page, and of course it doesn't work. Now what I'm going to try to do here is install nginx instead, so I'll run sudo apt install nginx, just like that. You don't have to follow along with this, it's just an example. Let's refresh the page. And now we have the nginx start page. So I've successfully switched this particular server from Apache over to nginx. Now the thing is, I don't actually have a preference between the two, but I wanted to give you guys something different, and nginx is something different compared to what we had before. So we have nginx here. What if I wanted to revert the change that I just made? I did create a snapshot before I did anything basically, so I'll click right here. I'll go over to snapshots, and what I want to do is roll this back. I'll confirm it. It tells me that it's done. So let's click over to the console. And since I didn't choose to include RAM, the state of the machine was not saved, so I will need to start it up again. We'll just wait for it to boot up. And now it's started. So if I go right here and refresh the page, we're back to Apache. So you can immediately see the value of snapshots. You could test something and then revert it back. And that's a very powerful ability to have. As an administrator of virtual machines, you will definitely find yourself doing this quite a bit. So snapshots, for the most part, are fairly self-explanatory. Let's go ahead and move on to backups. When we create a backup of a virtual machine, there's a few other options that we could choose. So it's not incredibly complex, but there's a few other options here. So what I'm going to do is click Backup Now. And as you can see, we have additional options. Right here, we could choose where we want this particular backup to go. I only have local storage right here. Now, as an aside, LVM Thin, which is the storage that I've been using for virtual machine disks, that's not listed here. But for right now, I only have this one option. I don't have all that much space here, so that's not great. That's why it's probably a good idea to store the backup somewhere else. But actually, it's always a good idea to store the backup somewhere else. I mean, if you are keeping all of your backups here on Proxmox itself, and then Proxmox goes down, maybe your disk goes bad or something like that, well, if that's the case, you lose the backups as well. So even though it's called a backup in this case, I don't really consider it a backup if it's not somewhere else. But again, we'll get to shared storage later in the series, so we're not going to worry about that aspect so much right now. Now we have several options right here as far as how the backup is going to be captured. We have snapshot mode, suspend mode, and stop mode. Which of these should you actually choose? So each of these different modes pertains to how much downtime you're willing to have. If you have a virtual machine that absolutely cannot go down for any reason, that's going to limit your options quite a bit. Now, at the expense of less downtime, you're actually increasing the possibility for disk corruption. It's incredibly uncommon, but it could happen. Think of it this way. If you are creating a backup of a disk, and that disk has open files and files are being written to, then if you take a backup in the middle of a file being written to, it's possible that maybe data hasn't finished writing when the backup is created, so there could be some integrity problems there. However, in the back end of Proxmox itself, it has some magic and some kung fu, basically, that it tries to do to eliminate problems like that. It's still a possibility, it's unlikely, but just keep in mind that these options generally pertain to how much downtime you're going to have, and more downtime in this case means better integrity. It's kind of like a trade-off. So let's go over stop mode first. If we set it to stop mode, that's actually going to stop the VM. And I literally mean shutdown. It's going to execute an orderly shutdown of the virtual machine and then create a backup. That also means that your backup, if you choose this option, will have the best consistency. And once the virtual machine is shut down, a backend process within Proxmox will kick off and create the backup. If the virtual machine was running when you kicked off the backup process, then once it's done, it's going to start the VM for you. If the VM was stopped when you created the backup, then it won't do that. So that's the stop option. We also have an option for suspend mode as well. Now the Proxmox documentation actually doesn't like or recommend this option because it results in the greatest amount of downtime. In my opinion, whether or not this is actually a good or bad option depends on the use case and the importance level of the virtual machine. If it's not really a big deal to suspend it for a while, then I don't really see anything wrong with it. Now you could think of suspend like suspend on your laptop or your desktop. A lot of laptops and desktops will go into suspend mode when you don't press any keys for a certain amount of time. And then to resume the computer, you just press any key or press the power button and it comes back to life. In suspend mode, in that case, your laptop or desktop will resume exactly where you left off. You could think of suspend mode here as pretty much exactly the same thing. It's going to put your VM into suspend mode, and once it is, it's going to create the backup. Then once the backup is done, it's going to resume the VM. Now the virtual machine will not be accessible at all while the backup is happening in suspend mode. Just keep that in mind. But being in suspend mode does actually increase the consistency of the backup, so the trade-off might be worth it. Another option that we have here is snapshot mode. And that's a little confusing. I just went over snapshots. That's the option right here. Now I'm going over backups. So why is there a snapshot option for a backup? Now the snapshot mode isn't actually the same thing as snapshots like I've gone over in the past. This is a specific mode of the backup feature. And this actually results in the least amount of downtime when it comes to backups. So if you're able to use this option, it's the one that I recommend. Now, in a nutshell, the way a snapshot mode backup actually works is that once you kick it off, Proxmox is going to create a backend process in the system itself that's going to do a live backup of that VM, and that's going to actually capture data blocks while the VM is running. If you have the QEMU agent installed, then it's actually going to increase the consistency of the backup, which is yet another reason to make sure that all of your VMs actually have that installed. So on my end, that's actually the option I'm going to go with. I'll click Backup, and let's see the process play out. And now the process is finished, but if you take a look at the output, something that you'll see here that's fairly interesting, you can see that the QEMU agent executed a file system freeze command, and that's helpful because, again, that's going to improve consistency. So it's in snapshot mode. It's going to freeze the file system, and then it's going to resume the VM, and then create the backup, like you can see right here. So if this option works out for you, I highly recommend that you choose that particular option when you create your backup. And then right here, we have the backup. So I could click Restore if I wanted to restore that snapshot. And even though I didn't actually change anything, I'll just go ahead and do it, just so you can see what it looks like. And I'm going to leave everything here. I mean, you could choose a different storage if you wanted to, but I'm going to leave it at the default, which is essentially just going to restore the backup where the original already is. So I'll just click Restore. And I'll say yes. And right now, it's actually complaining that the VM is running. So what I'm going to need to do is actually shut it down. And now that it's shut down, let's try that again. I'll click Restore. I'll leave the storage option here alone. But what I am going to do is check this box right here because I do want this VM to start as soon as it's done restoring. So I'll click Restore. I'll confirm it. And now it's restoring. And as you can see, the process is finished. And the VM is starting up. So after the backup is restored, it did exactly as I asked it to do and started the VM. So that part's pretty simple. Now the thing is, backups are great, But if you don't actually have this automated, then, well, I mean, you'll probably forget. We're all human. I know I would. So if you go here to Data Center View, before we were just clicking on VMs and running backups and snapshots within the VM settings. But the Data Center View, like I mentioned earlier in the series, pertains to every server and every VM. So if I go to the backup options here underneath Data Center, then what I could do is add a task. And this is going to allow me to create a backup job. This is how you automate backups. And these settings here, like I mentioned, allow you to create a backup job that pertains to every server and every VM. So what you could do is back up each node independently, and by node is talking about the Proxmox node. So in my case, PVE1 is the only one that I have. So I'm not actually able to choose anything else, but if I had other servers here, then I could have a separate backup job for each. Maybe I could have the backups for one server kicking off at midnight, and then another server at 1 a.m., and then a third server at 2 a.m., however you want to do it. But I'm going to leave it on all because I only have that one anyway. Now for storage, when this backup job runs, this is going to allow you to determine where the backups end up, which again, we'll get to later. So for now, I'm just going to leave it on local. Then we can set the day of the week. So perhaps you might want this to run on Fridays, and you can select individual days here, as you can see, but I'm just going to make this run every Friday. I think that's good enough. And then you could choose the start time. So maybe this particular server, I wanted to start backing up all the VMs at 1 in the morning. Selection mode, we can include the selected VMs, so we can just choose which ones we want to be a part of this backup job. But I'm not necessarily a fan of that. What I'm going to do instead is choose all, and that's going to gray out this section right here. Now what all allows me to do is ensure that every VM is backed up, like it mentions. It says all, and it means all. But another benefit of that is as I add new virtual machines to the server, it's going to make sure that those are backed up as well, so I don't have to go in here every time and add virtual machines manually. If I set it to all, it's going to take care of that for me. We could choose to have an email sent to a particular person or mailing list when the backup fires off. That's a good idea. And then for the emails, we could set it to always, which means an email will always be sent when a backup job runs. Or we could set it to failure only, which means we won't get an email unless there's a problem. I'll leave that up to you. Now for compression, I'm going to leave that alone. We have that option in the normal backup settings as well. I think leaving it at the default is more than adequate. And then we could choose a mode for the backup job as well. It's the same thing as doing a manual backup. The same descriptions of what these modes mean applies here as well. So here you just choose the mode that you like the best, and every VM that's a part of this job will be backed up via that mode. So that's pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to leave it on snapshot mode in my case, and then I'll click Create. So now we have the backup job right here. Now, when we get to the point later in the series where we set up shared storage, I recommend that you revisit this and change the settings such that it will create the backups in your shared storage, which is a lot safer than creating the backups on the same server that you're backing up. And also make sure you subscribe because at some point in the future, I'm going to be doing a dedicated video on the Proxmox backup server, which is going to allow you to take this to a whole new level. So there you go. Now you guys know how to create backups and snapshots within Proxmox. That's pretty cool. Now what's also pretty cool is the fact that Proxmox makes available a standalone product called Proxmox Backup Server, and that particular product will help you take your Proxmox backups to the next level. Now it's not actually part of this series, but if enough of you guys want me to cover that, what I'll do is I'll actually cover it in a standalone video. So if you want me to do that, please click that like button if you like this video. That also helps YouTube understand that you guys want to see more tutorials just like this. And I should have the next video in this series uploaded very soon if I don't already have that uploaded. So I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.